allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next agenda item is correspondence, visitors, and public comments. Nobody online?
Do you want me to mention the hats at this point?
Yes, please.
So, I think,
Julie?
yes, Don?
Julie?
Yes.
We can hear you, Don.
We can hear you, Don.
Because I heard this way.
So, I think you'll remember a few years ago when our,
Julie, can you hear me?
yes, Don, we can hear you.
Kara, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Don. Can you hear us okay?
I'm not receiving any voice. I can see the photos, but no voice. Yeah, they're not hearing me.
Probably needs to change the speaker setup here.
Okay, I'm gonna go all off.
It's probably Don's speaker in his computer. So I think you'll remember a few years ago, we had t-shirts that we gave to all students and staff in all of our schools, and that was really well received. And we thought it was time to do something similar again. So Laura and the team did some research, and we have purchased hats that will be going out to all students and staff and bus drivers, etc. And we have some for you.
Laura, Bonnie, and the team.
They had samples,
And they're grant funded.
and they are grant funded.
Perfect.
Thank you. This isn't the one we all passed around the office, is
We
it?
sized them for,
I love it. Makes me happy here.
one size fits all,
Board
even
members,
kindergartners.
board
for the most
members
part.
tend to have big heads.
This is my sample one, I just realized.
Love it.
That's something we passed around, right?
So hopefully
I
we're
love it.
going to get those handed out in all of our schools by the end of the week, and we're pretty excited.
Sticks to my head.
We're pretty excited to be able to do that. So I wanted to thank Laura and Bonnie and all the folks that worked so hard to make sure we could get them in time for the holiday break.
Yes, thank you very much. Great idea.
It's awesome. Thank you.
Next item is agenda review.
I don't have anything. When we do get to an employee leave request, we will want that to be an executive session.
Okay. Thank you. And the next item is approval of the minutes for December 5th. Anybody like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from December 5th.
Thank you, Peter. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ronick. Any discussion? Comments, changes needed to be made? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of approving the December 5th minutes, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
There's Megan. Megan, we're approving the December 5th meeting minutes.
Aye.
Thank you. Dawn,
Dawn, are you able to hear and cast your vote for the minutes? He's not connected to audio, it says.
all right, motion carries 8-0. Hopefully he can join us. Next, we have presentations and item discussions, and the first is the Highgate Elementary Principal updates. Yeshua?
Yes. I'll wait till, Julie's probably gonna put the presentation up there.
I will do that.
So, and if everyone does not know, this is Eric Becker here in the back, who's the SEL coordinator. For one part of the presentation, he'll be jumping on to talk about some bus-related stuff. So you can go to the next one, Julie. So one thing Julie had mentioned to us was problems of practice the board would really like to start seeing. And I am happy to present one to you that I am thick in the weeds right now with. So if you go to the next one, so it's coverage, right? So it is wonderful season of winter, which means we're all inside more and we are sharing our germs with one another. And then all of a sudden some of us have to be out, or someone has already planned to be out and now 2 other people have to be out. So I want to just kind of give you a picture of daily. It usually starts around 5:45, 6 a.m. when I start hearing a who's out, or this person's now out, we're going to move this person, shovel them there. And then usually I get to school around 7, and it's like that 20 minutes of no one's quite here yet. And then I try to figure out, okay, who's going where, why, when, and how. And I want to just kind of list some of the priorities that I think about when I'm trying to decide how we shift. Because of course, if you are not able to find a sub for someone, that means there's that domino effect of if you move this person, then this thing happens. We are fortunate here that we have someone on staff, or really someone who subs every day for us. They come in every single day, they're usually somewhere. But when you get to like 1 or 2 classroom teachers out, that's when it becomes way more challenging. So we definitely think of, well, first, teacher coverage is usually the first thing, right? We have to make sure someone's in that classroom teaching. And the next biggest thing is any students that are on IEP or EST, so if they're getting services, we want to still make sure those are getting provided, even if a special educator, interventionist, or somebody else is not here. The next big one is lunch and recess. How we do it here at Highgate is when Amber puts out a daily email of just information for folks to have, we always say, here are the lunch and recesses that we need help covering. Very fortunate here in Highgate, most people respond back with, yep, I can do this one. People choose lunches first this time of year, and then we work down to covering recesses. If we do have days where there's a number of people, sometimes I'll just walk around and ask people if they're willing to cover anything for the day. Just because sometimes through email, if you have 4 or 5 coverages, it's just hard to see everybody's response. Another big one is about individual student need. Sometimes we have some students or classrooms that will struggle when they have a guest teacher. So sometimes I really think about maybe it's someone on staff that will cover part of that day. But we really try to think of what students will also just need the heads up around someone not being there. That way we try to set them up for success as best we can. And the last part of that is I really try to protect adults that are getting shuffled. So for example, last week on Thursday and Friday we had a number of call-outs. And so people that I asked to help cover on Thursday, I did not ask them to cover anything on Friday. Because obviously if you come to work and every day someone's saying, oh, you're now here, that could just be taxing on yourself as an individual. So that's just kind of coverage. It really is a big problem of practice. Even like tomorrow, we're already anticipating a couple people, and I will probably get here a little earlier than usual tomorrow to see how I'm gonna make that all happen. And sometimes it's just me. Like sometimes it really is just easier if I go in somewhere for a half a day or part of the day, and it just lessens that domino effect. You know, obviously there are sometimes I just can't, because there are meetings that I just can't shuffle around. But I also appreciate it because one, it gets me in rooms with kids, which is part of something I don't always get to do all the time in the role that I have. And that I'm just in it with staff too. You know, if I'm in it and I'm covering, they can see I'm not just, you know, sitting in my office saying, haha, go work somewhere else today. At least I'm there saying I'm also in it with you. But again, it's also the relationship building, right? If I'm there with kids and adults, it's relationship building. But any questions about coverage? Because the next thing is actually not at all related to coverage.
You are not the only one.
No, I for sure on that one. So I did talk this a little bit at the board meeting last time we were at Franklin, but our Give Thanks meal was just really great. About 435 meals were served, which was excellent. If you go to the next slide, this is just what I put out to families. JR was lucky that he was able to come up and take some pictures, and we had the gym and the cafeteria just with student artwork. So I found a variety of different coloring pages and other things, and each kid I think did 2. So we had, you know, nearly 600 different coloring pages that were all around at different seats and around the walls. And the 6th grade team made that really awesome turkey that JR got. Because a couple of our adults and kiddos are very talented. So I just wanted to highlight, and I also want to pick some pictures where you might see a board member or two, and also a lot of our community members. So if you go to the next slide, it just has this. Oh, go ahead.
Your hawk was a turkey for a day?
Just for a day. Just for a day. And so these are just the folks. What I was really impressed by is that I put an email out to a lot of organizations in town, and within a couple of hours, I had people write back, like, great, I'll be there, thanks for the information. And these were specifically the groups that were able to be there. So we did have the PTKO, our town administrator, the volunteer fire department, I think like 5 or 6 of them came, which was actually incredible. And then the rec director and the rec board were all invited and came, which is not all the direct board members, but
That's wonderful.
yeah. So I just thought it really was a wonderful event. So I really wanted to highlight that.
It was well organized, a very good meal. Very good
Yeah,
meal.
I mean, I heard really, I think I jokingly said maybe to Jen that I literally woke up the night before with like, I'm gonna need more quarters. Like I was just so nervous of how it was all going to go, but it actually was very smooth. We didn't feel like a rush of people. Like it really was well executed, which was helpful. That really helps.
It was I was there, and it was a really nice day.
Good, that's awesome. All right, so now we want to just kind of talk about, I know we've talked before, even for you all as a board around bus behavior, how that all happens. So that's why I invite Eric to be here tonight, and he'll kind of just touch on a few points around how we actually handle bus behavior and what it looks like here at Highgate.
I don't have the authority to say next slide, please.
Next slide.
Let's give you the nod, Eric.
So I just wanted to start these are the general bus expectations that get put out. They're in our handbook. Like if you go pull our handbook right now, this is the first thing you'll see about kind of where we go. One of the things we do early and often is we do what we call a CARES roundup. So we actually go through the expectations, and one of our stations in that is the bus itself. So we actually get kids on a bus on the first day of school after they've already been on a bus and actually go through what our expectations are around how the bus should be. And so we have it kind of ingrained in them that the bus is an extension of the school and it's part of their day, and so we expect them to kind of perform in the same manner. You can go to the next slide. This is the way that we have bus behavior broken down. It's sort of a sliding scale. Each incident, obviously the first one, you sort of just get a referral, and then we kind of start taking students off the bus to try to just remind them of the importance. We do, every time there's any kind of bus incident, automatically communicate with home. So after the first incident, I'm going to call you, I'm going to tell you what information I have. We also try to investigate, and I use that term loosely, but I get a piece of paper, you'll see in a moment that has a couple of paragraphs that's written by a driver. I try to get to the why behind it, right? Because the driver, obviously, there's no way they can monitor an entire situation while safely driving a bus. So it's not really a fair ask of them. So I try to dig into it a little bit with the kids, like, tell me what happened. Like, how did we get to this moment? Like, why is the driver upset with you? So we try to get to the source of what's going on. So when I call families, I try to say, this is the whole story, this is what I heard, but here's the information I was also able to find out. And then it continues kind of, the second offense is a day off, the third offense is 3 days, the fourth offense is usually 5 days is typically what we do. But we do have a little bit of discretion because, again, we're trying to work with parents. The bus obviously is a huge component to kids, and there's a lot of legalities around accessing it. But we also want to make sure the bus is a safe and well-run place for our students so that their experience coming into school is good. Often bus issues that aren't dealt with lead to behavior issues within the building, which then tax the system and kind of take us around and around. So we work really hard to make sure that that's a space kids are experiencing in a positive way, and it is a good start to their day, and certainly a good end to their day as well. We do have some kids who are on the bus for up to 45 minutes for their ride, so it can be quite a long experience for them. You'll see here in the next couple of slides, I believe. Oh, no, okay. Yeah, that one's just there, but I think the most important thing is that we constantly communicate and certainly want to have parents be part of the process. You can go to the next one after that. That's our bus incident form. So as you can see, that gives the student name, the driver name, when it happened, then their very brief summary. The bus typically tracks the number of write-ups they do. I try to double track that. Sometimes we disagree, or sometimes I don't see the same consequential pattern the bus driver might, depending on the work I've done with the family or the information I find. I can give you a great example. A student last week got written up for a physical altercation. It ended up being connected to another situation where a student used a racially insensitive word on the bus, and that student was trying to stand up for a first grader who was being called a very inappropriate name. That tracks a little differently than this piece of paper would ever identify, and so when we do that kind of work, we try to take those things into account. But we do have physical copies, so every driver has access to that report. And then I obviously have hard copies here at school as well as digital copies. Typically, I send that home to the parent. I will say sometimes the drivers write things that I don't necessarily want to send directly to parents because they are just very direct, and I want to be purposeful with our conversation. You know, when a driver's having a bad day, it's like, this kid did blah, 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 and it's like, okay, you're feeling a moment. I appreciate that. Your job's hard. I appreciate that. I don't always send that to the parent, or I might redact some of it or white some stuff out. But generally, they get a hard copy of the original, so they have the explanation from the driver's perspective. Go ahead and switch to the next one.
So the driver fills out that form?
Correct. The driver fills out that form, presents it to me, and that then begins my investigation into what happened, and then whatever consequences depending on where they are. I always make the phone call first, so every parent gets the phone call from me. Afterwards, they receive this follow-up letter. It's a very standard form letter. This is when it happened, what happened. This is to let you know that was considered a warning. You see in bold the next thing that's going to happen should they have another incident, and then that goes home along with the scan of the report from the driver. In whatever form it needs to be. And again, most of the time it's original, I send it as is. Sometimes I have to redact something, or sometimes the driver will identify other students involved, which I of course can't send along. I'll tell the parents another student is involved, but often don't share names, but that typically goes home, and it's really just a double dip. The phone call, I think, is the most important part. I'm talking with you, I'm helping you understand. I'm also, oftentimes I hear other interesting information, so it's another connection for me to the experience the child is having, because I'm not riding the bus, so I'm just trying to support the bus and the folks. And we've had some drivers at times that have had some interesting experiences with the way they interact with students, and so it's another liaison for me to communicate with the company to sort of share what I'm hearing from families as well, and trying to get us all to a happy medium.
So you've already talked to the parent before you send this letter?
Absolutely, yes.
So they know what's coming, or they
Yep.
know about the incident?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yep, absolutely. This is the breakdown of our data from last year, just so you can kind of see where our write-ups are, what our percentages are. We had 63 write-ups last year, 51 boys, 12 girls, and then you can see the breakdown by grade. Middle school traditionally is where heavy hitters fall. That's pretty common across the land. Some of the new routes and changes have made some of our busing routes very full and very jam-packed, which can be complicated when you have 100 kids on a bus, and sometimes there's just not a seat because of timing and the way things work out. You can get some interesting combinations for sure. Some 7th and 8th graders connecting with 5th and 6th graders and trying to do different things, and it can get tricky. But I think looking at it across the board is always important. We try to look at it across grade level. I would say you'll see on the next slide when you look at this year's, you'll see as some of those numbers match some of those grade levels. 5th grade being high last year, 6th grade matching. So some of our same students who struggle continue to struggle. I like seeing the number be significantly lower around the halfway point. I think that's a good sign for us. We've learned a few things. There were a couple of adults who were working for the company that were really struggling at the first part of the year, and some changes were made by the company to support that. We did see a decrease in bus behaviors after some of those changes were made, for sure. We've also been lucky that a few of our own staff have taken on the bus driving duties, which does have an interesting dynamic for how kids perform because they have a relationship with the driver, so it's not sort of a stranger that they only see for, in some cases, 5 minutes, right? We have some kids that literally have a 2.5-minute ride and then 45 minutes, but having an adult there's a relationship with does seem to have a larger impact on their overall performance. So our numbers are looking relatively healthy right now. We do have a couple of things that we're working on with a couple of students that are going across ages that are not all connected to just here Highgate students, but some students at the older grades that are modeling some behaviors that are being replicated and doing some things that are not so wonderful, but we are doing our best to stay on top of that.
So question.
Sure.
The bus, what's the age group that it goes up to?
All the way through, so you've got kindergarten all the way to,
No, I mean for the older grades, for like MVU. So it goes up to middle school?
it goes all the way through high school as well.
And anybody can take the bus.
So
Yeah.
I didn't know if it was separated out at a certain age for the high school.
No.
So I'm assuming MVU has a similar system, so when there's an incident on the bus, it's gonna go to MVU.
Correct. Yeah, I don't know exactly how they manage those incidences, but yes, they do have some way that they're tracking that. And we do let them know if we find out from our end that it's something at their end, we do send that along to them so that they can implement whatever their particular system is around bus discipline.
And is there discussion between you and Mr. Palmer concerning like some of the things that
Oh,
are
yes.
happening?
Yeah. Christy and Dan are very collaborative, so especially if we hear anything, because sometimes the bus drivers just see me if I'm out there, and they just might come out and let me know something. I always encourage them, we'll write it up, or give them the information, then I'll get it to them. But yeah, there have been at least a few times that I've either texted or emailed, just said, hey, we got to touch base today around, this thing happening.
Is
How
there
often-
anybody, sorry, just go ahead.
How often do you have incidents that involve like an elementary school student, like a middle and high school? Do you see that often, or is that not really?
I'd say the challenge is that the interaction starts, it's less between them and more an offshoot of what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So middle school students or high school students having inappropriate conversation, using vocabulary that's less appropriate.
Yeah.
Our kids then replicating it, thinking it's okay, and our other kids around them being like, we don't say that here, and then they tell us, like, you got some great first and second
Right.
graders who can't wait to drop the ball, like, you know what, I heard on the bus, like, no, but you're gonna tell me, right? So I think we see more of that than specifically like middle school students interacting negatively with siblings, but there's just, phones and technology and exposure, I think, is probably one of our biggest challenges. Is often parents are like, my son saw this on the bus, or this was going on. I'm like, I don't know, I'll certainly talk to them, and it's sort of that very challenging game of, when I'm in 11th grade, when I'm looking at on Snapchat next to, and I think that's the challenge, is that we are putting a lot of kids, so in a perfect world, you'd think it's sort of kindergarten, first, second, third, working your way back to 12th grade, and just unfortunately at times the middle of the bus can get very muddled. Or a parent said, I want you sitting with your brother because the bus isn't working out, so then you get an 8th grade brother grabbing a 2nd grade brother because mom has demanded that he sit next to him so nothing happens. But then he's sitting with his friends talking about 8th grade training, and the 2nd graders just taking it all in. So we don't run into a lot of like kids mistreating kids in our write-ups, like kids just being blatantly inappropriate to our kids. It's much more of the conversations and the nature of how they communicate and connect is very different, and the understanding they have of words and terms can be very challenging for adults based on what they're being exposed to. I think is much more of the challenge that we face for sure.
Yeah, it's not very often that we have an incident with like a 3rd grader and an 8th grader.
Correct. Yep.
Unless they're siblings. But usually they wait till they get off the bus and then they fight on the way home. But typically, it really, and that has happened, and when that happens, the 2 principals get together and they investigate across schools and go ahead and do that. But that's the rare thing. What you do see is the language or kinds of conversations happening.
Mm-hmm.
Is there like clear understanding from the older grades in terms of how they're supposed to conduct themselves around younger students that's passed down? And this is probably a question for MVU, but I would imagine if we were to add up MVU and the elementary, I'm assuming the bulk would happen as the kids get older.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know what level of teaching or conversations they have around the younger kids, but I think the middle schoolers, at least from what we see, the middle and high schoolers may have more issues with each other, and it's like they know to leave the elementary kids alone, like inherently, they just know, like you should be helping them. Because they do, even in the morning, they transition because the older kids get dropped off by one bus, They jump on another one and they wait for all the kids to come in. Like you see some of them even help them with their bags and stuff. So there's some nice moments in there too.
Yeah, for sure.
I think I'd asked this last year. So from a board perspective, would additional buses to maybe separate some of the age groups be something that could potentially help? I know that's money in contracting, but
I know I had talked to Kristen once about it because when we first transitioned to Terracel, like Eric said, we had some really high numbers on the buses, so we were trying to figure out how to separate routes. And part of the problem is you could end up having to do 2 runs, and it's congestion is actually what they're really worried about. So you'd have similar buses going similar routes, because I don't think there's a perfect solution. Because I think even if you added like a 7th or 8th bus, I mean, you would have less kids ultimately, but I think because how Highgate is geographically, we're really spread out. So I can't remember all the reasons she had talked about, but it all made sense when I was there trying to like understand how we could do it.
so then from like our perspective in terms of policy and government and then like budgeting, would there be any recommendations of things that we might be able to propose that could help this, especially as we move into discussions about budget?
Yeah, I mean, if I were to try to sum it up, I would say a bus monitor, right? Because the most important thing is the accuracy of the information. The driver's doing the best they can, but their priority is to operate the vehicle and operate it safely. Having a human that, because what we find is the relationships are what changed our numbers. Like the difference from this year to last year really boils down to one particular adult who works for us, who knows all of our kids, who has a relationship with many of the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders and 9th graders even because of his longevity here. He's been able to really establish a different expectation and really knows. So when a kid's doing something, it's not, and you know, many times I've had situations where kids have given fake names or they've put it on a friend and been like, that's so-and-so, and then I go to talk to that kid like, I have no idea what you're talking about, and then I can track down that they didn't give an honest answer and the driver's just not knowing them well. If there were one person available to move around and to kind of go to problem areas and to be in charge of write-ups, I get that that's 5 or 6 or 7 people, whatever that cost is. It's not a small number or dollar amount. That's probably the simplest if you just want to talk about practical. It's this many people, it's this much money, it's a set amount of dollars, and it's done.
Yeah, we've done that in Swanton, and we certainly can do that, particularly if you have a particular issue.
Mhm.
That's not, the challenge is finding people who
Correct,
will do
right.
it,
Yep.
right? Because mostly you don't find someone who says, I just want to ride the bus in the morning and the
Yeah, of
afternoon,
course.
that's like that. They usually are folks that either start their
Yep.
day on a bus, end their day on a bus.
It's funny you also say that it's also the PM route.
Yeah,
We very rarely get
Mhm.
write-ups for the AM.
True.
Like very rarely get write-ups.
end of the day.
It's always interesting.
And we probably could get it down to 1 or 2 buses. We have a couple of particularly runs based on where they go, where the bulk of our kids ride, just based on the way the route's laid out. We probably wouldn't need every bus to have a person. We probably could narrow it down. I'd say probably 2, thinking about it off the top of my head. I'm not a master of all the route numbers, but you know, I know one person does like the first 15, 20 minutes of their route and their bus goes from full to half empty. Like, they boom, 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 they hit all those stops. And then it's a much more manageable situation. So it might be doable even on a much smaller scale. You just identify those 1 or 2 super intense routes where kids are really packed in and they just know there's that other adult to kind of be on top of those things.
We can absolutely do that.
Yeah.
We've had conversations about students in the past as a brainstorm. We really can't do that given the nature of the kinds of behaviors kids have, and hazing, harassment, and bullying, and the fact that sometimes kids don't tell the truth, and then you're a student in that situation. So it really is, and it can be a real challenge to put a student in that position. But we've had success with adults when we're able to find somebody who wants to do it, sticks with it. It's better than cameras. We have talked about having cameras on the buses as part of our ARPESSER strategy.
Have we done cost projections for that?
It's yeah, they're about $60-something thousand for all the buses.
But you're saying it wouldn't be potentially effective or
They are effective, but a person with a relationship is, is better.
The audio is always a challenge. And,
Right.
you know, like if a kid's breaking the bus or vandalizing, a camera's wonderful because you can just play the video. But if a kid drops an F-bomb or calls a kid in a racially insensitive name, the audio on the bus cameras isn't always, with the background noise isn't
Yeah.
always clear. Where if a dog was like, I was sitting here, I heard you, I see you, I went over and talked to you. I know within a certain number of minutes this happened, so that's where it's important. I also feel like oftentimes, sometimes, especially for a little kid who might, the human nature of getting off the bus and an adult being like, sorry this happened to your child, just wanna give you a heads up, can really go a long way. Like, I would never have known about our incident had that mom not called us and said, my kid got off the bus and heard this word. It would never have been reported to me. The camera would have never caught it because it looked like a scuffle. I would have said, why were you fighting? And thank goodness she did call because that kid had a very traumatic experience, which we were able to be on top of and support him.
Yeah.
But I would never have heard that if those words weren't captured. So I think that's sort of the give and take for us and what I see. Because I would say easily 95% of my things are some sort of verbal exchange where something is said to someone that's inappropriate or unkind, or there's an action that followed a verbal exchange. So.
Megan has a question for you. Megan, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So this is related to cameras also. My understanding was that some of our buses had cameras, so I wanted to better understand what buses have cameras, and also I think it's important to have a discussion about the cost because they might not be the ideal fix, but I think it's better than nothing, and especially given what just happened in Sheldon, I don't want to be in that situation and not have reliable footage, especially when we don't have an adult on the bus monitoring it. So I think that is an important discussion, and is that worth the cost, given the fact that you guys have made it pretty clear that it's difficult to find people who want to fill those types of roles.
Yeah, absolutely. We have, Terracell has some cameras, so if they're swapping out a bus because something's being maintained, you may actually have a bus that has a camera on it, and so every once in a while something comes up and the bus company will say, well, that bus had a camera on it today, do you want to see it, Mr. Pistina? And he will. So we do have it in our ARP ESSER grant, or did we take it?
We moved it to indirect just
We
in case
moved
we
it to
wanted to
indirect.
use it for the.
Right, so we do have it planned using indirect ESSER funds to look into the purchase of them. And Derek has been doing the research on it. So it's something that, administratively we have planned. But again, we are aware that it's not everything. But it is helpful.
How many buses?
I think if other districts are willing to, and that's me assuming that the other district has paid to ensure they have cameras. But, I think if other districts have shown that it's worthwhile and that communities support that in a budget line, I just think it's important that we don't lose sight of it.
Good, thank you.
How many buses in Highgate do you have bringing kids to the school?
Just in general high buses? 6.
So you've got 6 different bus drivers. So do you see, I'm just thinking that some bus drivers are probably more tolerant. Some have a demeanor that may make kids behave differently. I remember we used to have a bus driver, things got rowdy, he'd honk the horn and wave and it'd be an open field, everybody'd look, and then they all laugh. But I'm just wondering if you get more complaints from certain bus drivers. Not specific, but just like some.
Sometimes we notice trends,
Okay.
and we address that. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, it really is up to me on how we are going to handle a bus discipline referral. So if I am deciding that it's going to be one day off the bus, or I have times where I've said I'm going after the investigation, I actually disagree with your bus rider, but I'm actually not. gonna include that as a bus write-up. But I don't do that often, right? Because then also the bus driver will think that I just don't care.
Yeah.
But we definitely last year did work with Terracell where it was pretty clear one bus driver had a really hard time. And I think that bus driver eventually decided, no, I think driving that route isn't right for me. And they did move them to a different route, and another bus driver took over. So I don't think there's often that we find trends. There are times though kids will say like, I feel like the bus driver is out to get me. And we do sometimes have parents who say that, okay, so what they just wrote up does not seem like a write-up. That's when Eric or I have to have the tough conversation with the bus driver of, okay, they did this, doesn't seem as big of a deal to us, so help us understand the context. And there are definitely times where, I mean, we've met in a meeting with Terracell and a bus driver saying, it really feels like this one kid's giving me a hard time. How can we support you with that child, or what can we do differently so things just go better for them?
Sounds like you're taking all that into account.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's just so hard because you don't have the ability for equal distribution, right? You
Right.
can't. You'd love to say I can create a route where about 75 kids will be on each bus, but it's so geographically impossible that you just end up like some drivers have a very nice ride and they have their 60 odd kids and they go through the beautiful lands of Highgate and they drop them off, and some have 127 and they go down the main road and it's every other second they're jumping off, and you got to manage that time, stop, go, stop, go, stop, go. So I mean that's the other challenge. Is it's not like a solution you can say, well, just you drive here and you go here and you'll take 10 more kids, because it's geographically just not reasonable or cost effective to do that. So that is the challenge. There are just some routes where the number of students who get on the bus is significantly larger than other routes. And so obviously trying to, we've asked the company to consider that when choosing the drivers for each route, but sometimes experienced drivers want the easier route because they've done their time and they want to just drive along and have a nice ride every day. So.
And Terracell is very cooperative with us.
Yeah.
Like if ever I need anything, and I email Kristen, she'll get right back to me that day to make a plan. So I think they and even recently we've had a number of move-ins, and every time we're like, they're a bus 5 kid, another bus 5. Like literally, I think almost 10 kids that moved in were all bus 5s, and so we worked with them to say we need to get some of the kids off that bus because now we've gone from 50 kids to 60, and that's just a lot of kids, and that's not the actual numbers, I'm just saying that arbitrarily, but they were great and actually shifted, and they changed the route slightly to shift like 5 families onto another bus route. So they are good around, I think too, once they started off a year, and just you can't actually know who's really going to ride the bus, right? So you can make this beautiful bus route, and then a fourth of the families don't ever actually access the bus. So they also have that challenge. And we had it once where I think a bus driver dropped off like half of the kids in 10 minutes. And so we ended up actually shifting a couple of routes so that they didn't have that huge issue of most of their kids are off and most of their kids were not off. So.
The other thing too is we often have kids that take one bus in the morning and a different bus in the afternoon, depending on where they're heading. So you have some kids coming from home in the morning, but then they're going to daycare, they're going to grandma's or an aunts and uncles. So the rides look so different for some kids because they're on 2 different buses, or Monday, Wednesday, Friday is mom's route, Tuesday, Thursday is dad's route. So there's just so much going on. It's such a moving target for families depending on their needs and where buses go. So it's another interesting thing is sometimes you'll look at data and be like, I gotta fix that, but then you find out the kid's not on there for 3 more days, and it's a every 4th day problem, which we've run into a few times, where you're like, okay, when you're with this group of kids, you have this experience. When you're on your other bus, you have this experience. So that it is an interesting challenge, to say the least.
Well, I don't want to keep asking questions because I could about the bus all night, but it's just one of those that like the community, the bus seems to always be a very big conversation point, and it's so complex. You guys are doing really good work, so thank you. Depending on the direction the board may go in with the budgeting, maybe work in some different solutions that we could potentially add if we have some of that extra spending to put towards it. So I would say maybe that's something that it's a good time to have this conversation, because I think we're 2 years out from the contract?
Yeah, not next year, but the year after, 26.
So we'll have to redo that contract. We know it's gonna be more. And then, quality, what we offer the bus drivers, number of buses, cameras.
Route studies, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I think it's a good time to have those conversations if we have the leeway in the budget to do something about it. And there's also for after school, aren't there buses as well?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
I'm assuming similar issues that are crossing over, right?
And luckily, we're streamlined with the school's process, so if a student has a disciplinary action or whatever during the school day or after school bus route, it counts towards their culminating report on bus behavior, so. But yes.
Even though we actually really don't get many from after school.
Feels like a lot to me, but. I'm
Right,
glad
well, so yeah,
that-
comparatively, it doesn't feel like a lot.
What did my kids do?
And I said, and we periodically, you do reshare this information with parents about the rules for the bus and how things are going.
I wouldn't say it's bus specific, it's more of reminders of, here's the handbook, sections to look at, but I wouldn't say bus. I've never put out anything that says, please review bus expectations.
We do it with the kids, like when we get,
Yeah.
when we get back from break, we'll do another roundup
Yeah,
and we'll go over our expectations about bathrooms and hallways, and the bus will be part of that, so we will re-talk about that again.
I just mean from a parent perspective, I mean, getting like a back to school to the parents, here's the bus rules. Because again, a lot of this comes down to the parents, right? The kid gets a call and mom, dad's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. That doesn't help.
Right.
So if the parents are like, hey, you're back on the bus, this is a privilege, because it is a privilege.
Yep.
Right? We could, in theory, if we didn't have the funding to pay for this, it could all go away. So I think that reminder to the parents, like, hey, we're trying our best here, I think it goes on.
Yeah, I mean, all the parents I've spoken with have been extremely receptive and understanding. I mean, I think we put such a high value on communication. Our families know us. A lot of times they're crossover kids, so I'm talking to those parents regularly, so I have a pretty well established relationship. So I have to knock on wood, I'm very lucky here that we really do have a very receptive community when we approach these problems, and our parents do really want to work with us on it and understand why we're doing it. And I think they get some of the stories sometimes from their older siblings and kids, so I think they know. I think we're also lucky that our kids are really good at reporting because they see action, so a lot of our older Highgate kids know what's going to happen if they try to pull a fast one on us, that we're going to find out and get back to them. So I'd like to think if we broke it down by kids in sending district, that Highgate would score relatively well in bus discipline at the MVU level.
Good to know, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. Yeah, thanks, Eric.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Of course.
Girls are also what? Have a smaller rates.
I was maybe one of the families Eric knew well.
50%. Decent.
All right, next we have the after-school summer program update. We've got Bam.
Yes, we're really just gonna focus on budget this time around, as I just saw you recently. And I believe we're gonna skip through, as I mentioned last time, my deep dive into research on after school. So if you are interested in learning a little bit about the studied research here about the benefits of after school, both in the state and nationwide, you're welcome to take a look. It aligns quite a bit with what we're trying to do here as a district, and I still very much believe that what we do in after school is completely streamlined with, again, what we want to do for our kids. So to talk about budget, I think we're going to start here just to give a little example of some of the data that we collect through the 21st Century Learning Grant, and we are seeing results in what we're doing in after school to improve our students' experience. So 80% of enrolled after school students with a previous attendance rate of at or below 90% at MVU demonstrated improved attendance rates. 76% of the students in Swanton demonstrated growth in reading and language arts on state assessments. And this is all, we track all of our students that participate in our after school programs for, I wanna say, if they've been with us for 20 hours or more throughout the school year. So any students that came for like a day or two, we don't really track that. But we do track if they're continuing students. 68% in Franklin Central demonstrated improvement in teacher-reported engagements, which is a little survey we send out at the end of each school year with a list of all of our after-school students in each teacher's classroom, and they do basically a quick self-report on each student to talk about their engagement in the classroom. And 62% of after-school students here in Highgate demonstrated an improved attendance rate. So these are just a couple pieces that we focus on in after school. So as you can see, again, it's really aligning with what we're trying to do here. We talk about truancy, we talk about student outcomes. And here we just have a little bit of interesting data for you. Pre-pandemic, we had our total year enrollment was 588 students. And as you can see, we had an obvious dip in the years after for obvious reasons. And we, last year in the 22-23 school year, we've exceeded our pre-COVID attendance rates, and we're only going up. This is last year's data. We obviously don't know our full enrollment numbers yet for this school year. So that's really just showing that we are growing, and we're growing fast. So I'm going to provide a little bit of context because I'll be giving you a couple different scenarios as we had discussed in the last meeting. Our current rates are on the left, and what I am proposing is on the right. And unfortunately, even what I'm proposing here for our rates are still not quite competitive enough for this area. However, this was really the best structure we could come up with the limitations that we have. So as you can see, it's a couple dollars here and there hourly for our staff, but these are the different types of staff members we hire as well. Throughout the year, we hire between, I would say, 75 and 90 people, which is great, but it also means that there's a lot of benefits involved, and lucky Laura gets to tell us all about each type of employee has a different set of benefits that we pay into, and that is obviously, it's increased quite a bit since we last received this grant 5 years ago, so we are doing our best to offer relatively competitive pay rates to retain quality staff members, while also factoring in the overtime that we pay into and the various benefits based upon this type of staff member they are. So that's something you'll see reflected. And then I also wanted to show you all what the summer costs look like, and this is going to be important in the next scenarios that you see because traditionally, before COVID, before our ESSER funding, we had half-day summer programming, and transportation was here and there depending on the year. That's something our community has gotten accustomed to, is full-day programming with transportation. And speaking with our various community partners, with each principal at each school, school year transportation still seems very much like a priority for us to continue offering across the district. However, summer transportation is a bit of a question mark. Wondering, do we want to try it out and see if families still come to summer programming if we don't offer summer transportation? So you'll see a couple different scenarios here in which transportation is or is not offered, and it's also something we can choose to say, you know what, we can take that $32,000 out of the budget, or we can put it back in. And I also wanted to call attention here to the full day summer staffing. This is in addition to what we would be paying for a half-day program. So it's going to be at least $150,000 to maintain full-day summer programming throughout the district each summer.
Without the grants.
Without the grants, without ESSER.
And that would not be this summer, but the summer
Correct, correct. So luckily we have our ESSER for one more summer, so if we do choose to remove summer transportation, it'll be a soft launch into that new situation. Are there any questions before I do an overview of our scenarios and then kind of talk a little bit about what you all think? Are we feeling good?
A question about your earlier slides, talking about increased attendance.
Yes.
For, I guess my question is, do you get a lot of students that are truant to participate in the after-school programs?
I'm not sure what you mean by a lot.
I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. You're showing improvement, but it's shown in percentage, is it very many students that we're talking about?
You know, that's a great question. I couldn't give you an exact number, but there's a decent amount of them, I would say. We actually have quite a few students that I see attending our programs that are, when I look at their attendance rates on a spreadsheet, they're not great.
Okay.
So yes, I don't have an exact number for you though, but I would say after school is often a place for those students. And, you know, if they're absent during the school day, they're obviously absent during after school. And as I had mentioned before, we can't necessarily take credit and say, after school did all of this. Yeshua did nothing. But we can say that we're seeing trends and that we are tracking those trends and that we as a program can contribute to the efforts of the district.
The national trends are really that if kids are engaged in an after-school activity that they really enjoy, oftentimes that'll make the difference in them getting to school that day.
And that is one thing that we talk about in our staff training as well is, you know, if you're the last face they see in the school building and they leave with a positive experience, what are the chances that they're going to feel a little bit more excited waking up in the morning to walk back in?
That's not a discussion for today, but how do we engage those students to start participating in the after-school program?
That's a fantastic question that does kind of relate because I really do believe that investing in our quality staff members after school means weaving in a little deeper into our school day initiatives and finding folks that can really help bridge that gap between after school and in the school day. So I'll give you a quick little overview of each scenario and then we'll look at numbers. So scenario 1 is maintaining the current funding, which would reduce our program. When I say current funding, I mean the funding request that we put in 5 years ago with the grant, and that did not include ESSER support. So the program that we know and love right now would be reduced because we are not accounting for that ESSER funding. And it will not be accommodating for inflation or pay increases or anything like that, so you will see a reduction there. Scenario 2 is a minimal funding increase, and this, after crunching all these numbers, really was about, you know, what can we do to maintain the basic level of what we're doing now while also accounting for some very small pay rate increases and material inflation, transportation inflation, all of that. And then scenario 3 is, you know, the dream, the ideal expansion here, where we would have our full summer program and we would have cost of living adjustments, obviously not amazing ones, but at least recognizing that the grant that we're putting in for in, you know, 2024, we're going to need to figure out how to utilize that funding in 2029. And for context, the maximum amount that we can ask from 21C is $470,000. So if we're asking for that maximum, we need to be as competitive as possible. Therefore, our match would need to exceed that 50% requirement. We would need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to find as much additional funding as possible to really match and exceed that.
When you say, who are we competing against? Is so much guaranteed to our state, or are we competing against the whole country?
So the state is awarded a certain amount from the national bucket, and then we are allowed 16% of what the state is awarded, roughly.
So we're only competing with this other schools
within
in the state that have after-school programs.
And we are 5, because it's a middle high, we considered a middle high school. We are 5 of about 100 programs that currently exist in Vermont, and from what I'm hearing, there are several new programs kind of post-COVID that are looking for funding to be new startup programs. So it's a competitive year to be applying.
Does that eat into that 16%? Does that, those 5 new schools, is that eating into the existing budget, or they're gonna grow the budget?
No, so we are considered 5 schools. So what we're asking for is our district can only ask for that much total. Yes, good question.
But the pot is still the same.
Yes.
Meaning if more
So it's gonna be
schools get
split up more between
Correct.
more programs,
Correct.
possibly.
Correct.
I think that's what you meant.
Yeah, and so this is, when you're asked for this, it's 5 years?
It is.
Okay. And then the numbers in here, that's our year-over-year cost.
Yeah, so it's level funded, so yeah, whatever we
But
receive.
in here, meaning the budget right now?
What I mean, the different proposals.
Oh, the proposal, sorry.
That's our year cost, our yearly cost that we're allocating to it.
Right now it's
But
about
then-
200,000.
Okay, but then you're locking in potentially whatever number it is for the next 5 years.
Yes, yes. And whatever we lock in with 21C, we will again need to make sure that we're doing at least a 50% match, not just from our local share, but additional grants, CACFP, SFSP, all of that kind of stuff to contribute to that matching of those funds. Yes.
Now, in the past, I recall that if a program existed, that they really had the edge, in a sense, over those that don't exist. Is that no longer true, or?
Those were the good old days. Now we are considered a seasoned program, which is great, but they come from a lens of sustainability. They want to see that we are a community that can sustain this program with or without their funding. They want to see that we have community investment, community buy-in, and they are very excited about offering as many new programs across the state as possible post-COVID. So in speaking with our state director, I'm not concerned about us receiving funding. It's just competitive. It gets more and more competitive the more money we're asking for. So we really, again, got to make sure that we're showing that we have the additional funding support and the community support to really pull this off. So scenario 1, you can just take a look at some of these numbers with me. We're about roughly at $800,000. It was a bit difficult to piece out what was ESSER and what wasn't, but we're roughly about $800,000 right now. With and that this again would be a program reduction to attempt to maintain what it is we have. So as you can see, I've highlighted here what our local share looks like, and we would get down to about a total daily district enrollment of 205 students across the district. So that's the maximum we'd be able to have each day. No summer health services, which was something new during ESSER, that we were able to have a nurse on call throughout the summer, which we really appreciated. No summer transportation is included in this, and it would be a half-day summer program.
Devin has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So I'm curious about how we operationalize a grant that is fixed for 5 years when certain costs do go up. You know, like, I guess my question would be primarily on the staffing. If we're picking these wage rates, are we locking those in for 5 years, or is there some other operational mechanism you use to try to keep those competitive throughout the grant term?
That's a great question, and that's not something that had been accounted for previously. And in these projections, as we move forward, we've essentially adjusted it to say, if we were to give even just a 2% increase for our staff, what is that going to look like in, again, 2029, as you know, as we go into the future. So the projections that we have here, this does not account for cost of living adjustments. Scenario 2 does not really either, but scenario 3 does account for that, meaning that we would find additional uses of that funding, of that extra staff funding, and then in a sustainable fashion to then pare it back. So maybe we have a bunch of extra field trips one year, and then the next year we dedicate that pot of money to the increases in salaries or pay rates or payroll. And that's all, again, based upon what the benefits look like and what our programming is looking like at the time. But that's what the really nightmare headache of a budget spreadsheet I have has been projecting out. And of course, it's conversations with Laura and Julie all the time. I'm sorry, what was that?
Yeah, I think that approach makes sense. I think, you know, seeing where our rates are now, after a 5-year term where the general economy had a lot of wage inflation, leaves us really, really uncompetitive. And it sounds like you've struggled for staff these last couple of years, which doesn't surprise me. And I'd hate for that to be the pattern, that every 5 years, the last 2 years are severely understaffed, you know?
Yeah. I really appreciate you saying that, because that is absolutely something we've been trying to avoid. Again, knowing that this is an incredible opportunity to receive this funding and not wanting to exactly do that. We don't want to decline over time.
Megan?
Yes, just quick question. You mentioned several times showing community support and the community rallying around this. How do we demonstrate that?
you guys are full of good questions tonight. One of the other pieces of this grant application is basically establishing community partners and working with schools. So we come up with some MOUs and talk about, we're going to work with Swanton Rec on summer stuff. We're going to, we're so deeply embedded in Highgate Elementary and we get to, utilize their spaces and what it may be. So right now we've got a list of all of our schools, all of our rec centers and public libraries, and we're really working on additional community outreach. So Franklin County Airport, Northwest Tech, Rosie's Girls. The Notch, thank you.
You're welcome.
All kinds of partnerships like that is something I've been really focused on my entire tenure here, but additionally, these past 6 months or so, we're really, really working to create solid community partnerships. So if you know anybody, send them my way and we'll put them in the MOU. But that's just one example. Another example would be, of course, the local share. How much is our community willing to invest in?
So on that first, those 3 columns in the upper right, 21st, local, other, how does that compare to currently?
So this right now, I should have figured that out better, because other right now, you want to add another like $200,000 from ESSER to make what we have now. But I'm not sure, this is again without ESSER, what it would look like, so.
Okay.
It's about what we have now if you take all of the
Yes, if you take all of
ESSER
the
grants
ESSER away.
out.
So the one that's most interesting to me is the local.
Yes.
So, and that's just for, say, next fiscal year.
So this is scenario 1, this is the not the best of options.
Right, but I'm curious, this local, I remember years ago when it was 0.
Yes.
It's now 200. In another 5 years, what will the local be?
I mean, I believe that's.
It depends on which scenario you put.
Right, but so what? Because we're binding us to something here.
Mm-hmm. So you would be, so that's I hear what you're saying. So we have to make sure that we are meeting again that 50% match through the 21st Century Learning Grant. So this would be the basic local share that we would be looking for the next 5 years. Is that, I don't want to speak for Laura.
I think, I think
that
Toby's
helps.
remembering what I used to remember too when I first started here. There was definitely the implication that you were supposed to be reducing your or increasing your local share, and the grant would then taper off. And I don't know if you remember that, but it would be 50%, but then it would be 40-60, and then it would be 30-70, and then you're supposed to be able to maintain it yourself at some point. But that was 3 grant cycles ago that I stopped. I mean, I think they want you to maintain your local share and they want your program to grow and be better and more competitive, but I haven't heard all that conversation about us supposedly trying to.
So that's now, from what I understand about the 21st Century Learning Grant, is it's for new programs, they get fully funded, and then it tapers down to that 50%, and 50% is now the most that we can have as a seasoned program, and they're okay with that. But then they're saying it's level funded, that's it, that's all you're getting, and you have to constantly match that every year, if not exceed that match.
And so the other right now would be lots of things, but I'm assuming it includes Medicaid money?
No, typically the local share is covered with Medicaid funds.
Okay.
The other is food service. We are able to use the food grant.
So it's
The initials that Beth Ann was saying, CACFP and others are allowed to contribute toward our share.
And that Medicaid local that we're currently using to cover local, it's currently covering all of it, or close to it?
The entire local share.
Yes.
And we anticipate possibly that occurring for 5 years, or?
We create enough, we generate enough Medicaid revenue to more than cover this, so yeah, that's why we have such a surplus right now. Also, 21C themselves has not, because of ESSER the last 3 years, has not necessarily needed us to fund, well, there's lots of reasons. The last couple of years during the pandemic,
we created a budget in which everyone was attending and all the costs were the same, but then we had the pandemic, so the costs were not what we had budgeted for, so we did not need to transfer the full amount, the 200,000 from Medicaid, but we still did. So there is a bit of a reserve also in 21C, because we'd already allocated it, it was in our Medicaid budget, so we transferred it over. So not only are we carrying a surplus in Medicaid dollars, but we currently have about $200,000 of surplus in 21C local pool, so to speak, a little bit of a reserve.
Which is, and you were mentioning, I think we want to try to use that up within the next 2 years.
It's not,
Yeah.
it's not ideal, given our situation,
Right.
we can explain that, but it's not something you want to keep on the books traditionally or as a standard, yeah.
And it's clear now with the trends that we're seeing this year as we're running at full capacity, that's not going to be
That
a
won't
problem
happen again, yeah.
moving forward.
But if it was in the local line, it would be at your discretion how to fund it, whether with Medicaid or something else was built in.
Well, it would really be at your discretion.
Well, I just want, I think it's a discussion amongst us, but I don't see, 3 months ago, I wouldn't have been sure which one would have been able to do, but currently, based on where, I think we should try to push with some of the funding. I don't see how we don't take advantage of the scenario 3 and try to give ourselves the space to grow the program, especially where we are right now with some of the other budget things that we're working on.
Do you want to move forward?
Yes, and then we'll get to scenario 3, and I appreciate the support there. Scenario 2, as you can see, original program is maintained. So when I say the original program, I mean essentially what we are doing now with a minimal funding increase. So the program we know now, we're going to try to run it the best we can, minus our summer components. And this is again where we're really just going to try to keep the solid structure that we've created, keep going with that, increase those pay rates a little bit, with again an adjusted summer program to return to the original summer program here. Except for, of course, this upcoming year in which we do still have Art Besser. And as you can see here, we would have to increase the other portion as well, so we would need additional grant funding. And a lot of this comes into play. There's only so many grants a single program can manage before you're then creating more work than it's worth. So really trying to find a sustainable way to do this. But this is scenario 2, in which we would essentially, you wouldn't see a lot of changes minus our summer programming, but we would have a deeper investment in paying our staff and affording materials for the program. So you wouldn't see a program reduction minus the summer. And then scenario 3, as you can see, it's quite a jump here. The local share increase would be $143,000. As you can see though, that we are able to account for way more students on our daily enrollments. We would be able to continue offering the summer health services, summer transportation, and a full day summer program. And there, as you can see, the local and the other are different, and part of that is because there's only so many tiny grants we can really justify having, I would say, to contribute to this other portion before it's more work than it's worth. Or not even more work than it's worth, it's just not sustainable work. And the reason I had given you the summer costs before is because we could look at this and also consider half-day summer with no transportation again as well. And that's something that I know our community has really grown to appreciate, having the full-day summer. However, it's, we can still do tutoring, we can still do summer school, we can still offer a lot of things with a half-day summer program, because as you saw earlier, it's quite the expense. It's a huge chunk of our budget. But this is scenario 3, this is the dream, and I would love to answer questions. I think that was the last slide. Is there one more? I think I put up for us to have as a reference point, yeah.
And the only thing I was going to add too, Bethany, which I don't know if you said at some point, but I think it also for Swanton, I think the Notch, right, is no longer operating a program in Swanton for the summer. So I think also if you impacted summer program, that would be really impactful for Swanton.
Absolutely.
Because you would lose the schools program and the Notches program.
Correct.
Which would just leave you with rec, and there's no way they can handle I think all of that.
So Julie, I did have a slide at the end, if you're
We
able.
lost internet.
It just
Oh.
said,
Yeah, I
I
just
thought
lost
she's-
internet.
Yeah.
I did too.
Okay, so everybody just exactly memorize all three
Freeze.
scenarios, have it committed to your memory.
If y'all have different ones up on our laptops.
Yeah, great. So, yes.
I just wanted to
Please,
talk
yeah.
about Medicaid for a second. So we currently generate enough Medicaid for scenario 3. We generate enough Medicaid dollars that we could cover the full amount of scenario 3. We also have about $1.5 million worth of reserve but keeping in mind that the next several years, we're not exactly sure what we might want to use that to offset. So right now, we're using it for after-school program and we're using a few other small things, very small things. But in the future, that's kind of what's been kept in our back pocket as like some more flexible money that could offset tax.
Can we
rates
maintain
later.
both? You said, I can look at like the nurse in here I saw or something. Can we when you said we generate enough Medicaid to support the scenario 3 local?
Right.
And that includes maintaining what we're doing with the other little bits of Medicaid?
Yes, they're tiny. Yeah.
So.
Primarily, it's easier to manage the grant that way too. It's one big bucket after school program. It fits into the Medicaid, parameters, and so we, yeah.
So my question, which I'm sure no one can answer here, but I hinted at it last time we met. I'm curious how other school districts, because we are in a statewide system that compares each school district with each other school districts. I'm curious how other schools, particularly districts that are perceived to be better or worse than our district, how they're using their Medicaid money, and how or if they have after-school programs. I don't think we can get that answer. I don't know what they do at the state level, but that's like the most important questions, because everything I look at when it comes to money is I want to know how other schools are confronting the challenges or utilizing their monies for comparable programs, because at the end of the day, we're trying to offer our families comparable, equitable educational experiences.
And I did ask at Vasco and our neighboring district, I think you're alluding to, was
No,
not
it's
there.
not just, it's just not neighboring,
But
I'm guessing.
it's all over the board.
Yeah.
It's extra, some people use it for field trips, some people use it
Right.
for transportation, some people use it for bringing, what's the word, opportunities into their schools. They
Right.
might bring the Flynn Theater in, they're doing a week-long whatever.
Right.
Some people offset paraprofessional salaries with it.
Right.
It's
as long as it's intervention and prevention for students who are not identified as special ed.
there's not-
You can
it's not
basically do
consistent.
anything.
Not everyone puts the funding into their budget though, so MVSD as a rule, especially since the merger, but even before that, has chosen to put all of its local expenses, whether they're covered by a grant or there's offsetting revenue, into the general fund as we bring it to taxpayers, because that's in the interest of transparency. We do not just pay things from a grant directly and then not have the voters have a say in it.
Right.
So I'm not sure that's the case with everyone, so I'm not sure that everyone then puts all the costs in their Medicaid plan and that they use Medicaid to offset into their general fund and then has offsetting revenue. They might pay directly.
Hi, Laura.
Ooh, you're back.
There we go.
Yay.
Really
Eric
weird
fixed it.
There we go. There's never a dull moment.
We were just talking about Medicaid.
Ooh, we really went off. Oh, boy.
So what is it we're looking to get out of this conversation, or do we want to talk about it when we get to the budget? This is an area where we kind of need some guidance from the board. We've heard from one board member.
I mean, I think it ties into a lot of different things. So the margins are not huge between the three, and I think we have to keep expanding the program. I think just to meet unexpected things that could happen There's obviously a lot of benefit and a lot of good things about after school from people around the community, especially with Swanton potentially like losing their program. Because we're more rural as a district, losing that for a lot of parents who can't get to their kids right after school. I just see how with some of the other things that we're trying to do, we wouldn't try to go for the higher grant proposal and then match it. And then again, it's even the ideal expansion is still not a huge leap over the minimum funding increase. So if there
I
was,
think that the caution there is that there's only so much human capacity we have in terms of we can offer more for salaries and benefits, but we're not going to double our staff, right? And, you know, so.
well, I think I saw
it's-
the enrollment and it was like 265 versus 235. So we're
Right,
not jumping to like
so it's
400.
modest,
Yeah.
it really is.
And that's again, really, I think it was to Devin's point, that we're trying to account for cost of living adjustments as we move forward. So the program absolutely, I think, quality-wise, can grow substantially in a great way. There's a lot of quality potential there. And again, thinking of the opportunities we can offer, more field trips, for instance, more contracted services coming in and bringing new things to our kids. Those are the types of program expansions that I think are feasible and don't require us to rip our heads out trying to constantly find new staff members. I think instead it's really upping the quality, keeping that safe space, and not fizzling out after a couple of years when we can no longer remain competitive.
To Devin's point, I mean, we could do the scenario 3 ideal expansion and still in 4 years have to reduce because we don't know how things could change in terms of cost. So that's what makes sense to me.
So, Jen,
Yes, Don?
Jen,
Yes, Don?
hello?
Can you hear me?
Okay, we kind of come in and out, wake up. I can't now. I was just starting to talk and found out I was talking to Devin and Megan only a few minutes ago. Couple of issues. For a couple of years, Bonnie has worked with us, Julie has, to make certain that we didn't have turnover, that we were treating employees fairly. I was part of our educator, teacher assistants, maintenance staff. And yet we have an after-school program that provides a very valuable service. And it looks to me like comparatively they're underpaid compared to everybody else. So I hope that we would keep that in mind. If we do we really want high-quality people in all our programs and pay them a fair wage, maybe not an excessive, but a fair wage, then I think it needs to trickle down to the people in this program. And apparently it hasn't and doesn't appear to be going that way. So I, for one, am very much in favor of making whatever prepared adjustments we feel are appropriate and maybe a little bit more generous in what even the director suggested. The other thing is that I know working through facilities, we're hearing from Laura that we're in a good place financially. So I hope when we finalize our budget that we look at this program as a part of our school system, one that deserves to be funded adequately and one that should be supported for growth. So I know I'm a ways and maybe my connection's not too clear, but as a board member, I'm very supportive of this program. I see it in action in Swanton. And I think if we believe in it, then we're gonna put the money into it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Don.
Thank you, Don. So, Don,
Megan's hands up too.
okay. Don, because I saw some were having problems, you want to retain quality staff and that we haven't trickled down any pay raises to the employees in that.
We have made minor adjustments by shuffling our existing budget, but not a lot.
But they do not, there have been years, many years in a row, they have been making the same wage, yeah, there are not consistent increases with them.
But, well, part of this, what the school board wanted was retaining good quality
Staff.
staff.
So
So, Yeah.
He's in line with like
Yeah.
the ideal scenario where we're supporting them.
Yeah, scenario 3. Thank you, Dawn. Megan?
Yeah, sorry, I don't know if I missed something when we lost connection, but Rennick, you said something in passing about Swanton losing a program?
Oh yeah, Yeshua explained that.
Yeah, so the Notch has partnered in the past to offer programming for Swanton residents, and they are actually no longer offering it for Swanton. So that means it would leave it to the Rec, which is a paid summer program, or
Right.
Swan Elementary having their
After school.
after school.
And I can speak to that a little bit
So
as
that's
well.
the Notch summer program that they do?
They've discontinued
Yeah,
that.
they discontinued it.
So the Notch used to provide a half day with
Yes.
Swanton Rec.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
have decided it's no longer where they're focusing their efforts in our community. So we are working with the Notch to find ways for them to help supplement our summer programming and our school year programming, which is great. And Nicole Draper and I are in pretty close contact right now about how are we going to work together to create something in the Swanton community that covers as many bases as possible. So we are in pretty close contact with them, but it's absolutely correct that Swanton Rec will also have to go down to a half day, and they are a paid program. However, we are talking about offering an extra week in August, and this is part of our MOU, our community investment here, in which we provide some staff and materials, but we utilize the rec as a space, and it remains a free program for an extra week. And that's kind of part of the budget projection as well.
Okay, all right, thank you, that's very helpful. And, I don't know what it's worth at this point, but I'll just sort of reiterate what everyone said, is this is an absolute need of our community. And we need to step up to the plate and help provide something for our youth to do.
Agreed.
Thank you, Megan. Any other questions or comments, or anybody? I know I'm all for scenario 3, and it does fall in line with one of our goals of growing for the community and retaining the quality staff. And I'd really hate to see us lose the program, especially the summer program as well, which a lot of the community members, like to have their children in.
Absolutely.
So Jen, there's no action here, but
There's no action.
We're making a
People are just
recommendation.
expressing how they're feeling and stuff, and when we get closer to the, what we're gonna do for the budget and stuff, it kind of helps to know where everybody might feel about it. So, but there's no action.
Any other input?
Or anything else you'd like to see from me as you are making decisions? Anything else that would be helpful?
I do have a question. So with this, if the board did say yes to scenario 3, I know you had mentioned when you presented to us back at the Swanton School, one of your proposals was that keeping staff later, so if we eliminated the busing, which I just wanted to kind of put out there that I don't like that because I would rather us offer the busing, and the reason is if you're gonna, those children have been in school all day, and then you're gonna keep them there until 5:30 at night, because we're not offering busing, and then their parents have to pick them up, they're gonna be tired, they're not gonna wanna go home, they're gonna do their homework. It's not, to me, I just don't see any value added in doing something like that, so that's why scenario 3 definitely sounds better to me as opposed to not offering busing. And if you're having problems finding staff, to try to find a staff member that's gonna stay there until 5:30, well, actually probably 5:45, 6 o'clock at night by the time the kids are picked up, I think you're gonna have an even harder time finding staff.
It's a long day.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree, and in the conversations with principals, it was a pretty resounding, why bother? Like, especially thinking of the staffing costs, it almost, as you can see, our staffing costs are substantial. So if we're suddenly adding an hour a day.
It's more overtime.
Yep, it's more overtime that we're paying into, and it's not cost effective, and I don't think it's the best move for the community either. So I'm glad to hear that, because that was kind of across the board there, nobody was really psyched about that option.
One of the reasons why we talk about transportation with after school a lot is because the state program always asks us why we need transportation.
Yes.
And it's the thing they always want us to drop. Well, your neighbor over here is also rural and they don't need it. Well, they've built it that way and it seems to be working, which is great. We're getting a lot of feedback that that we require it and people are depending on it in order for their kids to participate. So that's one of the reasons why we keep looking at the program with transportation, without transportation, because they bring it up a lot in the grant process.
And then conversations like this are very helpful for me to then come back and say, actually, our school board thinks.
Well, there's an additional benefit too that with the after-school program with the busing is, I'm going to go back a little bit in history, but there at one time MVU used to have what they called an activity bus, and it was for anything that was going on after school. We didn't have an after-school program at the time, but any activities that went on after school around 5 o'clock, they would bring the kids home. And one year, unfortunately, MVU's budget got cut substantially and they eliminated that activity bus. Well, with this 5 o'clock, I think it's around 5 o'clock, 4:30, 5 o'clock that they leave MVU, kids that are in the sporting programs, if they sign up for after school, can jump on that bus. And so now it's kind of like done a twofold thing. The kids that are in extracurricular and sporting events are also can take advantage of that bus. So it's really, been to me, an outstanding benefit, and the kids from sports are also taking advantage of it. After-school programs taking advantage of it, and I just think it's a win-win.
Thank you, Fred. I agree. It's been really nice to see that shared resource too.
Well, thank you, Beth. I know a lot of work goes into this. I think the board is quite supportive of what you're trying to do.
Am I?
I think you're excused.
You're excused,
Oh,
you're
okay.
good.
I was telling Julie, I was like, I never know when it's supposed to be.
Yes, yes, you are. Thank you
Well,
very
thank
much.
you all so much.
We still have more budget talks.
Yes.
Just saying.
You're welcome to stick around and talk about capital projects.
I think you guys got that. But thank you so much for your time and for your support. I'm really excited to see what we can do. So.
Next up is budget draft 4.
Yeah, I know. I was like, what?
Possible action.
I know you put it.
Yeah, I always get confused. My mailing address is Swanton.
Yeah.
Make a motion about
I knew
anything.
that.
Yeah.
I hate to say anything, but I'm glad you changed it yourself.
I'm really glad I'm not a geography teacher.
Capital investment plan considerations.
Do you want me to go over draft 4 first, or do you want me to go to capital? I don't have a lot to say about draft 4.
Yeah, just, if you could just summarize it just a little bit, please.
Sure.
Great.
So draft 4 is up a little bit since the last draft. We're at a little over 48 million. It's an increase of 3.4 million over fiscal year, or the current fiscal year, 24, increase of 7.64%. A few of the things that have changed since your last draft, Julie, myself, and Bonnie had another meeting with MVU. Don't know if you want to talk about the staff there, Julie?
Sure. We talked to them about, what are some things that you really need if you wanted to add something to this budget. One of the things that was cut last year was a PE position, and then it was really cut. I was just talking with Dan today, prematurely, as we were expanding the minutes of the ag program. We were then reducing how much middle school exploratory coverage the ag program could give to the middle school, which then when we cut a phys ed teacher, then all of a sudden we didn't have as much coverage for exploratories. So we really want to bring back some phys ed to MVU, and also to allow us to be at the ed quality standards minutes for phys ed. And we have talked, I just today was going through the numbers for all of our 4 core content areas in MVU: English Language Arts, Social Studies, Math and Science. Dan is working with a team at MVU to try and get rid of most study halls, not all study halls. Probably 11th and 12th grade would still have some, particularly kids at the tech center, or if they need driver's ed, they may need a study hall, or if they're taking a lot of AP courses. But certainly 9, 10, and some of 11, we're going to be eliminating study halls, which means we want to add a class. So we're looking at teacher load, and one of the things that they would really like is to have an additional social studies teacher. With Alyssa Urban doing PLPs for most of her time at MVU and only teaching 2 social studies classes, in order to really teach classes instead of just have study halls. That is one area where they would like to shore up some staffing in social studies. So we put those into this draft to see what impact that would be on the overall budget.
That's the only increase to positions that we have. Since the last draft, we have also removed the additional elementary AD position that we had included in draft 3, and we've returned that funding to the current model, which is about $15,000 worth of elementary stipends. I think there's still some conversation to be had around that, but for this draft, that's what's happened. I've also, once again, I know in draft 2, I told you that all the contracted services are represented in there, but we know that all the ones that are related to students are extremely fluid. There's special ed contracts, tuition, out-of-district placements, lots of things, consultations, evaluations. And so I've once again evaluated those. We have had a couple of